Hello and welcome to Minimise Debt, Maximise Cash with Top Service, where each episode we will give you tips on how to maximise your cash and minimise your debt in the construction industry. My name's Emma Reilly, Top Service CEO, Fellow of the Chartered Institute of Credit Management and current CICM Council Advisory Member representing Trade Credit. In this episode, we continue our series of excerpts from our October 2025 seminar, Managing Retentions. There were a lot of principles shared that we think are good to remind ourselves of. This episode is about how to deal with non-payment after work has been completed. You will hear Philip King asking the questions and Simon Howell of Tarmac and Giuseppe Parla of Menzies providing the answers. If anything you hear is of value to you, please register for our newsletters on our website and we will let you know when the next webinar is. The link to register is in the show notes of this episode.
How do you deal with a client who simply ignores requests for payment or for retention until they're ready? I think it's back to you, Simon. I mean, you can employ a DCA, and Emma will, and Charlie will do that.
I think it's having you go back to process. So it's process. You should, just like you have on any collection process. This should be no different. And for example, the one thing is about being proactive and preemptive on these things. So you do not wait until it is a due debt. You actually diarise it 4 weeks in advance. You go to them and you give them the chance to come up with any disputes or anything else. Surface all of those, and then you bought yourself 4 weeks to actually get rid of those issues. Because within a lot of the construction industry, as we know, those sort of negotiations, the adjudications, all of those things take an inordinate amount of time. So if that's the case, you do it 4 weeks before, you then go due date, you should be paid. A lot of them will be paid at that point, but then those, as we're talking about here, are going to just ignore you. So they've ignored you asking about what's going on, and if there are any reasons for non-payment, then you get the ones who are just going to ignore it. You send them effectively the old letter before action going, but you adapt it to go, we will, if you don't reply to this within this time period, say 2 weeks, we'll go dispute process, and you stick to your dispute process because every contract's going to have one in there. And you actually make sure that you send the right letters and you do all of that. It's worth employing the right consultants or legal advice around that to make sure you got the wording correct on all of those sort of things to be able to get to that, and so that you are compliant with the contract even if they're not. That will give you the best chance. And then if they don't, you go legal. Shouldn't be scared about doing that, because as we've said before, it is the difference often between making a profit and not making a profit.
Sure. And your point earlier about, and we've talked a lot about this, about having a separate ledger, doesn't mean the debts are separate. And you said earlier that if someone is looking to place a new contract with you, or wants supplies or whatever it might be, and they haven't paid for retentions, you have to use that as a lever in order to, no, we won't go on site unless you pay the retentions that you've been ignoring for the last 6 months. Because that's the point where you have some power, and you need them to do that, and it's important to use all these elements. What was the question here from someone I know? Hi Richard, how are you? Where you start working on a job and the contract remains in contention or unsigned, which is fairly common in consultancy, credit management teams need to ensure that an abbreviated T's and C's is submitted and agreed. Wriggle room is not your friend.
Well, I would have expected Rich to come up with that. But yeah, goes in the same territory. What we're talking about here is making sure you know your contract, you know what you can do, and you understand the process which is actually built into that contract. By doing what Rich has just mentioned there, you make sure that you are giving yourself the best chance of doing something, because you are getting your terms and conditions. It goes back to Lord Denning back in the day, last man shouts. That's where you need to get to.
And getting that in place before you start is really important.
Correct.
Because once you've started on the road, you can't go back to the start line, can you? How common is it for, abbreviated T's and C's to be agreed as an interim step towards a full contract being signed?
Not. To be quite frank, I think this is where many people fall down, particularly small businesses, but also bigger ones, particularly, where people want to get work and so on. That this is all about getting it right at the start. You get it right at the start, you eliminate or certainly significantly reduce the chance of people not paying you, because they know that you're on the ball. And it's exactly the same as any standard sort of credit element here, which is what works best in any collection. Going back to Debbie's point about the collection sort of education that we do within the institute, it's about persistence. It's about consistency and persistence in this process. As long as you are consistent with it, what you're doing is eliminating it, and it makes it very clear where you have to take bigger action to be able to recover your money.
Yeah. Thank you. A question for somebody else I know. Morning, Atul. How are you? Are there any regulatory protections for smaller, vulnerable businesses? Any thoughts?
I think there are, off the top of my head. Again, I'm not a complete expert in those contract sort of terms, but certainly from that point of view, and going back to your point about the way things are going to develop over a period of time, there's a number of things here, for example, that are being mooted, such as auto releases of retention. So you're actually effectively using project bank accounts or some other methodology or tool to be able to protect those. And from Atul, no, you can't have your tiles back off my roof. But I think it's about having those sort of things, and also maybe thinking ahead is not to be scared about using things like escrow accounts and so on. Again, they're quite technical things, so get the right advice and so on. But by doing that, you do protect yourself, and you provide yourself with a bit of security where perhaps you wouldn't necessarily want to give somebody the biggest credit limit, but it does provide you with some sort of security. Project bank accounts, on the other hand, you've got to be careful how they are managed and what the terms are on them. They're not the panacea for all ills that the government thinks they are, because just because there's a project bank account, you've still got to clear the invoice into it. Yeah. So there's a variety of different things, I'd say that.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a great believer in escrow accounts. I've used them massively over the years, and they've worked really well. But you're right, they're sort of a bit complicated. But once you get a process in place to set them up, they can be really, 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 really powerful and protect you. When I was on the Construction Leadership Council, there was lots to talk about project bank accounts. We're going to change the world. But there was a piece in the press last week about someone that lost loads of money in insolvency, where they thought they were protected, but actually the invoices hadn't been cleared into it, and therefore they hadn't. Have you come across that, Giuseppe? Project bank accounts and people getting caught or
not often enough. We do have cases where there's funds held on a separate account. I actually asked the question only this morning of one of the cases I'm looking at. If it's not held in a separate account, it's not held on trust, and therefore it just becomes general monies for the creditors. And I think that's where people miss out. We've been involved in some solar companies. They were regulated by the HIES, I think it was, and that they helped out on a lot of the warranty side where people were feeling that they missed out. But it's key to creating a trust is that it needs to be in a separate, like you say, an escrow account. And I think that is a valuable tool. I really like the point that somebody, I think it was Simon, made where it's almost like an automatic release of that money would be good, because then there's more onus on the people that need to pay that retention to prove that they're not going to pay it and why. So I quite like that as well.
Okay. Is a contractor permitted to withhold retention payments to a subcontractor if the contractor is in dispute with the end customer and has been unable to attend a site to verify if all snags are resolved?
That's an interesting one. I think it depends on the contract. That again, it depends what the contract says. Are there any specific clauses in there and so on? But generally, if the work that the subcontractor has done is correct, just because the other guy is not being paid, if it's nothing to do with what they do, then there is no reason why they should, just because they're not being paid on the building when you've done everything you should have been doing, then the answer is no, they shouldn't be able to withhold it because your work has been correct.
The challenge, of course, is finding out whose work is not correct. I remember going to a huge contract, one of the biggest contractors in the country, who was refusing to pay for a job, and they weren't paying because the tiles fell off the wall. So the tiler couldn't get paid because his tiles weren't adhering to the wall. And ultimately, it turned out that it was a plumber who'd left some leakage behind the tiles, which meant they wouldn't stick. And so the plumber was the person at fault, but the tiler was the person not being paid, and it went on for months and months, and it's not easy to resolve. And I think that's the joy, or the opposite word, of construction, because it is such a complex environment, and it's not widgets in boxes on shelves. It's so many parties involved and so many timelines that are critical, and delivery points and all of that stuff. I'm always amazed when I get involved in watching construction projects, how stuff arrives at the right time. So, roofing can start and it all seems to fall into place. And when that goes wrong, it's a sort of can of worms as to who is responsible.
Hello, Emma here again. Thank you for listening. If there are any other questions, please do contact us on LinkedIn. Just search Top Service Limited. And also do check out a video version of this podcast on our YouTube channel. Once again, search for Top Service Limited. If we don't see you online, we will see you in the next episode, where we will help you to maximise your cash and minimise your debt. Bye bye from Top Service.